So, control weaknesses. How do we tackle them? What do we do when we see them? I like to break it down. This is really similar to what we saw in the module workshop, not orientation, module workshop. So, it might be a bit of a refresh, but whenever you have control deficiencies, governance deficiencies, in this case, it's more focused on data deficiencies. All of these lend themselves very nicely to using this WIR approach. So, the key thing to remember with WIR, I think of it as it has to be this integrated package. You have to have all three components in order to get competent. And we'll see that when we look at the feedback guide in more detail. So, to break it down, for the weakness part, you need to state the problem. It should be a recitation of case facts or in enough detail that your user knows what the problem is. Often, the hardest part for candidates is the middle part, the implication. And that's because often you see a problem in a case and then you immediately think, I know how to fix that. And you want to jump to the recommendation. But you need to explain why it is a problem. This sells your user on your recommendation and informs them that there is a problem and all of the bad things that could happen if they don't fix it. And then with the recommendation, it needs to be specific. So sometimes candidates make vague recommendations, and it also needs to tie back to your identified weakness. So I know from the chat when Rob was chatting, someone said, I only found two weaknesses in this case. Maybe you actually did find more according to our feedback guide, but sometimes candidates will lump issues together instead of separating them out into their individual components. So that's something else to really consider doing is trying to break them down because the more that you have them broken down, the more likely that you are to hit some of those individual points. So let's have a look. I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty unpretty. It's not beautiful. I will say Rob's Excel is a lot nicer, but ugly
Thanks,
works
Nikki.
on an exam.
Ugly that can be read by the markers.
That's right. That's right. I've already told you I'm a horrible typer. Apparently, I need to take a typing class, according to Rob. But the way I get around it is by being concise. That's my workaround. So, whenever I have control, governance, data issues, and I'm using WIR, the first thing I would do is use the headings. So, weakness, implication, recommendation, and I would copy and paste it down my page. Just like Rob discussed for doing financial reporting issues, I would take the same approach for WIR. And then when I am writing about these issues, you see I don't have bolding or underlining or even bullets. I'm just getting down to business and I'm keeping it concise. For me, when I read through the case, the most obvious or the first issue that I saw that I felt the most comfortable with was the manual process. So, when thinking about those issues and which ones to tackle, that was my strategy. I went with what I knew that I could confidently write about first. And I just have one example to illustrate. So, I noted that she was writing down that information on paper and then putting it into the spreadsheet in a few days. So, this is very closely worded to the case facts. She also is copying and pasting information from the website or email into Excel. So that's the problem or the weakness. Then I need to say why it's a problem. So this is where I need to interpret it for the user. I have one example here. It's a little different from the solution. It doesn't have to agree to the solution, but you need to explain why it's a problem. So I've explained it that you could make errors when transferring the info to Excel, either through manual processes or copying and pasting. That can cause incorrect bookings and unhappy guests. Short, one brief sentence. And then for my recommendation, you see that I just get to the point, no flowery writing. Stop using manual processes. Get daily reports from the website with customer requests and export them into Excel. That's how I would do it. Again, you might have a different recommendation that could be equally valid. And when she gets those requests from phone calls, enter it directly into Excel. Don't write it on a piece of paper. Put it right into Excel. And then another recommendation, she could consider implementing a CRM system that's integrated into the website. That's maybe a further down the road. Um, but again, just short, to the point, really trying to highlight those key points in as little or few words as possible. What did you need to get to competent? You needed to have several weaknesses related to data collection and storage and provide valid recommendations. And as Rob said, competent, which we're zeroing in on, we feel would be getting yes on three of these. And then I've highlighted in red, what do you need to get yes? So, yes, identifies the weakness, discusses the implication, and provides a recommendation based on case facts. So that just reiterates to us we need all three components. If you just have a weakness, and even if it's a fantastic recommendation, if you are missing one of those pieces, you're going to be held back from yes. So four issues here. Again, we feel that it is three to get to competent. I believe that we had 10 minutes allocated for this. I did actually time myself. How long did it take me to type that? Even me, as a really horrible typer, it took me 3 minutes to type that. So maybe you could, if you're better typers, you could do it in a quicker amount of time. Rob could probably knock that out in a minute and a half. I don't know.
I'm a very fast typer, but the thing is that 3 minutes, even at your pace, you can still get three of them done in 10 minutes. So and still have
That's right.
a little bit of extra time. So I
Yes,
do have
last
a
week. Oh,
que Oh, sorry. I have a question here that I wanted to interrupt. This is from Aiden. Can you explain the issue for data collection channels and payment processing calendar bookings? Do you have any broad comments on those? I think probably why they're an issue.
sure. So, as I mentioned, when I went through, I just picked the one that I felt would be the easiest one for me to tackle for illustrative purposes. I'm curious, Aiden, was it an issue of you picking it out in the case and seeing what the issue was, or did you have difficulty discussing the implication and recommendation? Maybe that will help me to address your question a little bit better. Um, I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, you couldn't come up with the issue. So meaning you couldn't see what the issue was. I'll just wait for you to respond. Okay, perfect. Look, I'm not gonna lie. There are many times where I read control weaknesses and I don't immediately see what the issue is. Or sometimes I read the issue and I have no idea how to fix it. I don't have a recommendation. So that's why I mentioned when you're reading through these, you're trying to pick out the issues. You should try and tackle the ones you feel most confident with. If it's like this and you don't see what the issue is, or you don't know how to have a recommendation, then that means that you need to debrief that solution really well. That indicates it's a technical gap. There are times, even for payment processing, I'm not going to lie, I am not the most tech savvy person. Rob's a lot more tech savvy than I am. He may have had an easier time thinking about what it was for payment processing. But again, when you're doing these cases, when you're going through, this is where you identify those issues. Go back, read the solution. We also have the data governance ebook, and you might need to
I
do
just
some
want to point out
external reading. Hmm?
Unit 8 focuses on data. So
You're not there
yeah,
yet. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know, but a lot of people kind of ignore it.
Yep. Oh, or don't
Yeah,
submit in week 8. Hey, Rob?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so again, if that's the case, it doesn't matter where it is. If it's data, if it's a different, we had in the module workshop, some candidates had difficulty finding some of those control issues, finding them in the case or figuring out recommendations. Put it on your list, do a debrief. Yeah. Um, does that help answer your question, Aiden? Okay, perfect. Okay. So last week, I was starting to say, last week when we did this webinar, and I said, in 10 minutes, I'm not going to lie, I think I could only probably write about 2 issues well. And that's why I timed myself, Rob. I timed myself today to see how fast would it actually take me. I know I'm such a nerd. I had to collect the data. So it was faster than I thought, right? Because even I would have done the same time allocations as Rob. I would have said, you know, had those 4 issues, I would have tried my best to write about as many as I could. You always want to try within the time you have allocated to write to the best of your ability. But I also want to say it is far better to write good issues, so quality over quantity. You would, for example, you wouldn't want to do a halfway job on 4 of the issues, write a weakness, maybe an implication, write a recommendation for another one. You want to have good issues. Good quality is the first, or is the best approach to have. And this question, if you don't know how to give a recommendation, will you get marks for addressing the issue at least? Well, you'll probably get a partial if you don't have a recommendation, if you just had a weakness or implication. But my recommendation, no pun intended, is you always try and give them something. Maybe it's not the best recommendation, but if you give something is always better than nothing.